Hello, I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York. Welcome to One to One. Each week, we address issues of timely and timeless concern with newsmakers and the journalists who report on them, with artists, writers, scientists, educators, social scientists, government and nonprofit leaders. We speak to each one to one. Today's guest has done the seemingly impossible. She has humanized the city's sanitation department, whose workers are largely invisible to the average New Yorker and whose responsibilities are way underappreciated. Anthropologist in residence at the city's Department of Sanitation and NYU professor Robin Nagle describes the source of her inspiration and passion in her new book, Picking Up: On the Streets and Behind the Trucks with the Sanitation Workers of New York City. It has just been published by Farrar, Straus, and Giroux, and it's a labor of love and admiration for the men and women whose job is to handle our trash. Welcome.
Thank you.
So how does a nice lady with a PhD in anthropology get interested in trash?
I've been interested in trash since I was a child. I went hiking with my dad in the Adirondacks, and we were in a part of the forest that looked as if no human had ever been there. But when we arrived at our campsite, behind the lean-to was a dump where campers had been too lazy to take out what they had brought in with them. And I guess I was a little idealistic as a kid and assumed that hikers would care enough about the environment to take their trash with them. So the question that I had in that moment was, who did they think was going to pick up after them? And that was the seed that I began to ask everywhere I went. Who's picking up after this city or this community or this group of people or myself? So that was the very, very beginning, long ago.
Mm-hmm. So skip forward many years. Your book grew out of a proposal you made to the sanitation department to study what it's like being a sanitation worker in New York City, and to learn that you actually worked. You had to qualify, you apply, qualify as a sanitation worker, and you actually did the job. How long did you do it for?
A few months in total.
Okay. So a few basics. How big is New York Sanitation Department? How many employees? How much trash did they collect on us?
There are 9,000 some odd employees in total. That's the civilian and uniformed force. The uniformed are approximately 7,000, and they collect roughly 11,000 tons of household waste and about 2,000 tons of recycling 6 days a week, sometimes 7.
Each day?
Correct.
Okay. And how many women sanitation workers are there?
There are 196 women in the uniformed ranks. That includes sanitation worker and the officers' ranks as well.
Okay, okay. And they've been women in that job since about when?
1986.
Okay. So the basic jobs of sanitation workers is to pick up the garbage, dispose of it, clean the streets, and to do snow removal. Those are their basic tasks. Where does the garbage from New York City end up?
Well, Manhattan's garbage goes to a waste-to-energy facility in Essex, New Jersey. The garbage from the rest of the 4 boroughs goes all over the eastern seaboard, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Ohio, I believe one of the Alabamas, one of the Carolinas. Well, there's only one Alabama. It goes to Alabama. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we ship it very far away.
Okay, so they're little bits and pieces of our lives all over.
Indeed, yes.
All over the country. You say in your book that the job of the sanitation department is more crucial to the city than that of the police department or the fire department. Why?
Let me start by saying I take nothing away from police and fire. My argument is that first we need to share the love to include sanitation, but I argue that it's the most important force on the street because it's primary. There are 2 things that a city must do well in order to thrive. One is to get clean water in and dirty water out, and the other is to get the garbage up off the street every day. Otherwise, the city becomes a vast sort of cauldron of disease and illness, and we would not be the shining global capital that we imagine ourselves to be if sanitation were not on the streets every day.
And the job of a sanitation worker is more dangerous than that of a cop or of a firefighter. In fact, I think it's the Bureau of Labor Statistics says it's the 4th most dangerous job in the nation after fishermen, loggers, and air aircraft pilots. What makes it so dangerous to be a sanitation worker?
There are two factors. One is that the stuff that we throw out every day is not always itself without risk, and when it goes into the back of a truck, the hydraulics and the mechanisms of the truck are such that it's often then catapulted back out, and it can catch the worker and cause injury and death. The other source of risk is traffic. Sanitation workers are in and out of the truck all day, every day, and motorists are generally not patient with a collection truck, and so workers are often hit by passing cars, or they are involved in some other traffic accident that can harm them or kill them.
Do we lose sanitation workers every year or every few years?
Yes, every few years. There have been
Okay.
10 deaths in the last 10 years of sanitation workers just in New York City. That's only local. If you look at the statistics nationally, of course, it's a different number. People get grievously injured in ways that never make the news. But for instance, if a police officer is shot and is in the hospital, not killed, but seriously hurt, that generally makes the news. When a sanitation worker is badly hurt enough that he's probably going to be in some way changed for life, that does not usually get a lot of press. And yet he's working in service of the city. He's putting his life on the line. She has a family. The sacrifice is, I think, comparable. But because the work of sanitation is given less regard, the attention to those kinds of risks and the actual harm that people suffer does not get the same, it isn't considered to be as important.
Right, right. And following up on that, even though the sanitation department, its work is so crucial and the work of its employees so dangerous, you say the sanitation department is sort of widely reviled, despised even, and its workers are willfully ignored by the public. What explains that?
Well, the job is done pretty well every day. Therefore, we can take it for granted, we the larger public. So it's easy to assume you put the bag on the curb, it will be gone when you come home from work. You are at an event on the street, a parade or a street fair, and there's someone there with a hand broom doing their job. It's true of sanitation work specifically, it's true of maintenance work more generally. If you look around any place that needs to have a set of workers who maintain its well-being, whether that's the infrastructure of a building or the cleanliness of, say, a university, there's a workforce, and they're charged with that responsibility, and they are generally overlooked in sort of the day-to-day understandings of what's important to pay attention to.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it was interesting, you gave an anecdote, I think, of a sanitation person who said hello to someone on the street, and the person just totally ignored them, or else maybe cursed them.
Well, yes, I've seen that happen. I've also, when I was on the job, I tell a story in the book about cleaning up after a parade, and I was on the hand broom, and people were still against the barricades because it was right at the end of the parade, and I needed to get under the barricade to get at the litter under their feet. So I said, "Excuse me," and I was closer to them than you and I are right now, and they did not see me. And it wasn't that they were being intentionally rude. I was already figured into their consciousness as something that they didn't need to pay attention to. And there were many other happy distractions, the end of the parade, their children, whatever they were eating. So I watched my fellow workers, and no one on the hand brooms bothered to say, "Excuse me," they just did their work, even though it meant sometimes they were risking scraping people's feet. Mm-hmm. And once you get the broom on your foot, you move. But
right.
It was fascinating to realize that Harry Potter's cloak of invisibility had nothing on me.
New York City did not get an efficient system of garbage collection and street cleaning until 1895, when the then mayor appointed Colonel George E. Waring Jr. as head of the Department of Street Cleaning. What was the city like before that, and how did Waring reform the sanitation system?
The city before that was so disgustingly dirty that sailors said they could smell it 6 miles out before they even got to port. There was all forms of waste, human and animal, food, construction, piled in the streets, shin deep in some neighborhoods. Private neighborhoods sometimes paid for private street cleaning services, but in general, just the regular people living in New York had to suffer conditions that by today's standards are almost literally unimaginably awful.
And what did he do to, what were the reforms that Waring brought in?
Waring made the job real. In that I mean, he made the workers accountable for their responsibilities. He eliminated any chance of political patronage so that you couldn't get the job if you happened to pay off somebody, which had been the normal practice before he came into office. He hierarchized the department. He made sure that the sanitation worker, or the street sweeper as they were called then, reported to a supervisor who reported to a superintendent.
It was military style.
Thank you, yes, it was military. He imposed a military structure that is still in place today and that allows for a very clear line of responsibility from the top to the street and from the street back up.
And the street sweepers wore white and with helmets.
Yeah, the helmets imitated those of the police of the day to indicate authority, and the white uniform was to suggest hygiene. As doctors and nurses wore white, then he felt strongly that since his workers were the first guardians of public health, they too should wear white. I'm sure the people responsible for cleaning those uniforms were not happy about that. His wife told him he was nuts. But it was a savvy move.
But I love the street sweepers parade that he organized in 1896 to sort of show off the new department. So we're going to take a short break, and then we'll be back with more with Robin Nagle, author of Picking Up on the Streets and Behind the Trucks with the Sanitation Workers of New York City. Welcome back to One to One. I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York, and I'm talking with Robin Nagle, the author of Picking Up on the Streets and Behind the Trucks with the Sanitation Workers of New York City. It's just been published by Farrar, Straus, and Giroux. So, what does it take to become a sanitation worker? What are the requirements to get the job?
There's a written test. Assuming you do well enough on the written test, you are advanced to take the physical test. Assuming you do well enough on the physical test, you then are put through a series of medical exams to verify that two things, that you have basic physical well-being and that you don't have pre-existing conditions that would make it impossible for you to do the job. And then you also have to verify certain residency requirements. There are certain places you cannot live. I don't mean within the city, but if you live in New Jersey, for example, you may not have the job. Then you are trained to drive the truck, and then you take the road test, the truck driver road test for your commercial driver's license, and then you are eligible to be hired.
Tell me about the physical test.
The physical test involved two primary components. One was moving baskets, the equivalent of public litter baskets like we have on the corners, around various obstacles and of different weights that you then had to get into the back of an imaginary truck. They had a barrier that was the same height as the back of the truck, so you had to get the can over that. And then the second part of the test involved bags of various weights and clumpiness that you had to also move over and around obstacles with the condition that you couldn't drag them. There are ways in which if you were actually on the street doing the job, you could manage that particular challenge, but for the test, the conditions were a little more restrictive. And again, that was against the clock.
Now, you're not a big lady, so I'm impressed that you were able to pass this test. Does one train for it, or do you just go and take it cold?
Some people do. Some people go in and take it cold. Apparently, the day before I took the test, a woman had gotten to the heaviest weight in the second part of the test and couldn't move it, and that was the end of the line for her, which was a difficult story to hear. But if you can do the job, whether you look like you can do the job or not, and that's an important point to make, I think. Sanitation workers come in all sizes and shapes and ages. So if you pass the test, the city has now assured itself that you are qualified to do the job and you have the physical strength. And if you pass all the other tests, the medical and the driving test, and you get hired, if I'm a big hulking guy and I'm working next to a slender woman but we can both do the job.
Right.
There's
Because
no
you've
problem.
shown that you can.
Right.
What does it take to operate a garbage truck, a broom, which is the street sweeper, snow remover? Complicated, right?
Well,
all of them.
they all have their own sort of their own mechanical competencies, and they also, I think of it as a physics problem. You have to be aware of the object in space, and how big and how wide is your truck. When you're looking at a narrow street, maybe that you have to get down, can you assess the likelihood that you will in fact be able to get down that truck, or are you going to jam yourself up? The broom, it's like being in the cockpit of a really slow plane, because you've got all kinds of dials and knobs and gauges to tell you things like, is the water on or off? Is it your left pickup gutter broom or your right gutter broom that is spinning at what speed, at what angle? Is one hunched up and the other one's down, which is what you want for certain conditions? What's the speed of in other words, I can go into a lot of detail of this, but the machinery itself, you almost have to have a relationship with the object that is the machinery to do it competently. And frankly, that takes time. I was not on the job long enough to claim expertise as a broom operator, which made me respect even more the people I see doing it well, because it's not easy.
And one of the people who did it the best was a woman.
Yes,
Said,
yes,
right.
My teacher was.
How about the snow remover? What is it? Is it a snow plow? What is it? Okay.
It's the collection truck, the garbage truck, but you put a plow on the front. That changes everything about the truck: the turning radius, the weight, the momentum you're going to have in certain conditions. Can you fit through that same narrow street you fit through the day before without the truck? I mean, without the plow? Maybe not. So if you're used to the truck, but then there's a plow on the front for the first few times you're out in the world with the plow on the front, you're learning all over again.
You wrote that snowstorms are the real test of the sanitation. That's the real test of a sanitation department, how the department reacts to a big snow.
Well, I'd say there are many real tests. I'd say every day the work is real test.
Right.
Snow is a particular kind of test. And mayoralties have risen
or fallen
on
how well they responded to big storms.
Exactly so.
Yeah.
The organizational structure is perpetually scrutinized and refined and polished, and they try to anticipate every possible condition, and they are almost always successful. When they are not successful, it's a big deal. And the storm of December 2010 is one example of how the conditions were far more severe than anyone had anticipated, and there were some problems. After that storm, the department spent a considerable amount of time and energy, again, scrutinizing everything that they did right and everything that went wrong, and figuring out how to make sure that it never goes wrong like that again.
Mm-hmm. Managing garbage collection, street cleaning, and snow removal is a huge, and you just referred to that, is a huge logistical challenge. You write about the importance of the numbers and making the right calculations. Tell us about that.
Every garage has a target weight that they're supposed to meet on average. So every truck that goes out to the street is supposed to pick up enough of its share of the mandatory weight that district meets its daily target weight. Also, the route has to be cleaned by the end of the shift. If those two things don't happen, there are consequences that ripple up the chain of command and across the borough or the city, depending on how big the gap is. The department can tell you with pretty detailed accuracy how much garbage will probably be on the street, let's say in the west side of Manhattan in August, or the east side of Staten Island in January, based on experience, based on a continual analysis of conditions on the street, based on how they see demographics shifting over time. They've got their eyes on all of those factors all the time.
How do sanitation workers feel about their work?
Some sanitation workers are very proud to wear the uniform and do the job and do it well, and other sanitation workers are proud of the job but cautious not to tell too many people outside the job what they do. The stigma attached to being a sanitation worker, or even just working for the Department of Sanitation, is surprisingly deep in some places, and some workers have learned the hard way that it's easier to just keep quiet about some of the specifics of their employment.
In fact, you talked about one worker whose wife made him promise not to tell anybody what he did.
Correct.
And he kept the promise.
To this day.
Tell me about the benevolent societies. And no, just go back. I guess at one time, in, in terms of ethnic groups, I mean, my sense was that at one time there was a large Italian presence.
There still
in the
is.
Sanitation. Is there still?
Sure.
Okay, okay.
The demographics of the department, and I have this in an early part of the book where I give rough estimates, and then there's a footnote with the exact numbers. And I don't have the exact numbers in my head, but roughly 50% of the department is white, roughly a quarter is African American, 20% thereabouts is Hispanic, and then the remainder is classified as other. In the 50% white, many make a pretty sharp distinction between Italian American, and Irish American. And that is sometimes almost a real rivalry, and other times kind of like cousins who kid each other at a family gathering. But the tensions there, it's interesting to watch. So that's basically the demographics of the department.
And the benevolent societies, a lot of them are organized around ethnicity or nationality or
religion.
Or race, religion as well?
Yes.
Okay.
I gave a talk last week to the Hebrew Spiritual Society, which Jewish members of the Department of Sanitation can belong to the Hebrew Spiritual Society. The African American Benevolent Society is one of the oldest. The Emerald Society is, and the Columbia Society are two of the biggest. The Emerald is Irish, the Columbians are Italian. The Holy Name Society is for Roman Catholics. The Steuben Society is for people of German ancestry. Yeah, so there are all kinds of, I don't want to call them clubs because they're far more significant than clubs, but they're pretty important to the life of the department.
We have about 2 minutes left. Did the research you did for this book change the way you view sanitation workers?
I went into the project with a lot of respect for them, and I came out of the project with even more respect for them, and also with a sense of envy, that there is a camaraderie and a kind of a bond that they form with each other that I don't see comparable in, say, the world of the university.
I gather that you have been, for some time, promoting the idea, trying to drum up support for a museum of sanitation.
I have.
Tell me about that.
We have a museum of transit, first-class museum. We have a police museum, also very well done. There's all kinds of museums in New York. We should have a museum that celebrates the very real requirement that we keep the streets clean every day and the people who do that work.
So what's next for you?
The museum. We're also working on...
Is that catching on? You think that's going to happen?
Oh, it will happen.
Okay.
It will happen. We're organizing the archives of the department. They don't exist. They should. And there's an oral history project that we started a couple of years ago that we'll be growing forward again this fall. I hope to have eventually 100 voices of sanitation people from all walks of life connected to the department. And I work on that project with an oral history class that I teach at NYU. That's actually a really wonderful work because it pulls my students in, and it also helps sanitation people find a different sort of place for their voice to be heard.
What's the title of the course?
It's called, gosh, it's got one of those fancy academic titles that I can't remember off the top of my head, but there's a DSNY Oral History Archive.org website, and that's where you can find the interviews that we've done so far.
Okay, but do you teach a course on garbage collection?
I teach a course called Garbage in Gotham, the Anthropology of Trash, which looks not at New York exclusively, but looks at how the habits of discard and the ways in which we define some objects as durable and others as disposable. What does that mean culturally, and how do we...
What does it say about that society?
Exactly so. And that's a wonderful class because we really get into some sort of thick questions, and my students, I assign them practices, like they must keep everything they would throw away for 48 hours and then bring it to class, and we do a kind of archaeology of their life. And just the act of holding on to rather than letting go of helps them understand how deeply ingrained the disposability practices are, because either they forget and throw things out, or they catch themselves and then keep it, and then they have to drag this thing around with them. And that's really inconvenient. So the privilege of discard and the ingrained sort of practices of disposability, we really take that for granted.
Okay. Well, it's a fascinating book, really, really is. We're out of time. We could have talked about trash. We could have talked trash for another half hour, but I want to thank Robin Nagle for joining me today. Picking Up on the Streets and Behind the Trucks with the Sanitation Workers of New York City has just been published by Farrar, Straus, and Giroux. For the City University of New York and One to One, I'm Sheryl McCarthy. If there are any people you'd like to hear from or topics you'd like us to explore, please let us know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.